Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which is the latest film in our Sonic franchise, starring Jim Carrey, Ben Schwartz, Keanu Reeves, Idris Elba, Colleen, Tika, Sumpter, Majdoub, and James Marsden. And I honestly am not the biggest fan of these Sonic films, or at least those first two films. I like them enough. I think that they are fun and entertaining. I think Jim Carrey very much elevates both of those films, but I think that both of those had one key problem for each of them that kept me from loving each of those films. And so now that we get to the third Sonic movie, I was vaguely excited for this movie. I wasn't, running out to theater excited to watch Sonic 3, but then after walking out of this movie, God, this is a perfect Sonic movie. I am so surprised. Honestly, one of the biggest surprises of the entire year for me. And so, of course, this will be a spoiler review for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So if you haven't had a chance to watch it in theaters just yet, go check it out. If you, just like the first two movies like me, I think you're really going to dig this movie. And if you love those first two movies, you're going to go crazy for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So let's just jump right into it. So I kind of want to break down this movie between the two issues that I had with the first two Sonic movies. The first Sonic movie, I think, focused a little bit too much on the human real world element of it being a live action Sonic movie. I didn't really care too much about James Marsden, Tika Sumpter, and Adam Pelly's character. I think that they're fine in those movies, but I think that they're best in moderation. And so, I was kind of glad that they kind of scaled their roles back inside of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and they focused more on the actual hedgehogs themselves. But at the same time, the second movie kind of scaled back Jim Carrey's role in that movie, where he was more of a robotic character that didn't have the fun, goofy personality that you really loved Jim Carrey's performance for in that first movie. And so those were my first two issues with those first two movies, was the heavy reliance on the human element inside of that first movie and the lack of Jim Carrey in that second movie. And I think that this movie honestly solves both those problems by making Team Sonic the head focus of this movie from very beginning to the very ending of the film, and also having double the Jim Carrey. I loved it. So let's start off by talking about Team Sonic, because if those first two movies did anything well, it is setting up these characters to be extremely likable. I really like Ben Schwartz as the voice of Sonic, and I really like his dynamic with Tails and with Knuckles inside of this movie, because that's trio of characters that were introduced in the second movie. To see them all working together as a team in this one was a lot of fun. And obviously we have Shadow be introduced inside of this film as the main antagonist of this movie, along with the Robotniks, and I really liked his dynamic with our team as well, because he gives a different vibe to him, because he has this very jaded past, this chip on his shoulder with humanity that is very different from the optimism that Sonic holds, to how he was kind of raised into this world by the Donut Lord. And I think the most unanimous thing that everybody loves about these Sonic movies was the fact that the creative team behind this really do care about these characters and care about making a very faithful adaptation of those games, because obviously we had the first trailer for the first Sonic movie being the monstrosity that it was, and the fact that they listened and delayed the movie and made sure they fixed all the visual effects for that, and they made these character designs very honest and had the action sequences very fun and bright and colorful inside of those first two movies. I think all of that carries through in perfection in this one, because I think the fight scenes, especially the opening scene in Tokyo between Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles against Shadow, was so fun. I think Shadow's abilities, being able to teleport around the space around everybody else, is a lot of fun to see visually on screen. And I think that the rivalry kind of pitted between Shadow and Sonic at the very beginning of this film, to see that, yeah, this guy is better than Sonic in a lot of ways, and is, really wiping the floor with all three of them. And Sonic is very much not ready to face a threat like this, to face somebody that is better than him in every single way, that really does mirror his own storyline inside of this film. I think that dynamic worked really great. And again, the visuals of them fighting in this Tokyo sequence was great. And I also love the fact that, Shadow's character and Keanu Reeves voicing this character gave me a lot of John Wick vibes, especially him walking through the rain in Tokyo with all the bright neon colors. It looked straight out of John Wick 4. But also in these opening moments, we had the death of Commander Walters, who is the Olive Garden guy inside of that first film and has been a presence in all these movies thus far. The military asset, the guy who is kind of in charge of the government side of these films, which he was always a funny presence inside of these movies, because he always had the craziest product placements, Olive Garden roles inside of those first two films, which honestly stuck with me a lot more than I thought it would. But to see him actually die at the beginning of this movie at the hands of these, Eggman type of technology that has been taken over by some imposter of Dr. Robotnik, as it is set up at the beginning of this film, added a lot of stakes to this movie. I think that this movie feels a lot more grown up than those other two Sonic movies, because I think that this movie understands that it needs higher stakes than those other two, because this is the end of a trilogy. It wants to be an epic conclusion to these three films, and I think setting the stage right here with setting up an imposing threat with Shadow and then killing off a character that we came came to, at least really enjoy inside of those first two films, and kind of setting the stage for this more darker Sonic story inside of this one worked extremely well. And of course, this does lead to Team Robotnik. Of course, Lee Majdoub returns as Dr. Stone, or Mr. Stone? Agent Stone. He's, of course, the right-hand man to Dr. Robotnik, and he comes to save the hedgehogs from these impersonating egg machines and to lure these characters into, bring him to Dr. Robotnik's, little laboratory that he's been hiding in all these years, and to essentially team up with them because they have a common enemy now, somebody who is impersonating themselves as Dr. Robotnik. And this brings, Jim Carrey back into the fold, who also said he was retiring after Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and he said that he wanted a really great script to bring him back into the acting fold, and I'll get into that here in a minute as to why I think Jim Carrey came back for this film. But he's just wonderful inside of this film. Every second that he's on screen, I just have a massive smile on my face, and that's the reason why I watch these Sonic movies. I wasn't lured in from the games because I'm not a big video game player. I haven't actually played any of the Sonic games, which is probably why I didn't love those first two Sonic movies as much as other people, at least fans of the games, love those films. And so when you get Jim Carrey to lure me in to watch these films, I'm always going to be entertained with him on screen. But to get back to my original point in saying that this movie is an improvement over those first two, like I said, that first movie has a heavy reliance on the real world and the human element of that first Sonic movie, versus this one is very much, focused on Team Sonic and Robotnik and Shadow and all those characters, whereas, Tom and Maddie are still inside of this movie, but their roles are in moderation. I think that their role in this one was actually really fun because, yes, you did get the entire sequence where you get to figure out that, Robotnik is teaming up with his grandfather and they're going to go off on their own, and now Team Sonic needs to go back to his original team, his original family, to, I guess, bring them into the fold as to what this adventure is going to be. And you get them break into the gun facility where they have the other key card to control this, super weapon that Grandpa Robotnik has created in prison for this government agency, essentially. And I really like this as well. This is really the only sequence where you get to see these characters have an important role inside of the story, and I think that works for these characters because, yeah, their dynamic has been fun, has been set up in those first two movies, but you don't really need to expand on that. And so to see them, support Team Sonic and play with this little disguise thing that they have, which was really fun to see them playing off of, the Rachel and Randall character, who make a cameo inside this film as, our Maddie and Tom characters disguised as those other two characters to break into this gun facility. It's really fun to see even those other supporting characters make a cameo through this sequence inside of this movie, which was a lot of fun. I think this movie could have easily, not showed those two characters at all and just kind of focused on Tom and Maddie, but no, this movie and the director and the creatives behind these Sonic films have a reverence for the people that they worked for in the past, and they clearly have such a fun energy behind the scenes to, bring in these other people. Even if it is a smaller role inside this film, they're still excited to show up inside of a Sonic movie because you can clearly tell that this is the family around Sonic and their importance for this series. And although I do think that it is an improvement to scale these characters back inside of this film, I'm still glad that these characters had a role inside this film, and I think this is their best role inside the Sonic films yet, because it is very much has something to do with the actual plot at hand, unlike some other, secondary side plots in the background of the second film with, Tom Maddie's character and Rachel and Randall's character, who honestly didn't really care for the wedding storyline all too much inside of that second movie, but to have them very integral into the actual story at hand inside of this one was a massive improvement. But then my other point that I made at the beginning of the movie was the fact that Sonic the Hedgehog 2 scaled back Jim Carrey's role inside of that film, not in terms of like his screen time, because he did still have a good amount of screen time inside of, Sonic 2, but he was kind of, controlled by the Emerald, and he had this, kind of more zombie type performance where he was just, at the will of this ultimate power that he has gained, and he wasn't, the fun type of character that we expected to see Jim Carrey have, especially how he was inside of that first film. And now we get double the Jim Carrey inside of this movie, and so he's playing both Dr. Robotnik, as we've seen him in the past two films, and also Gerald Robotnik, who is the grandfather of this character in this film. And what I loved about Jim Carrey's dual performances in this movie is the fact that it is extremely meta. He is perfect at not only playing against the other characters inside of this movie, but he's great at playing off of himself. There's a really great meta joke inside of this movie when they first meet, where they're kind of, figuring each other out, and they say at one point, it's like, oh, we're so similar. It's almost as if we're two actors playing the exact same character inside of a movie. And it was probably my favorite joke inside of this movie. It is an extremely meta joke inside of this movie, and it had me laughing for several scenes after that joke was made. And like I said, I do think that it actually makes perfect sense as to why Jim Carrey came out of retirement for this film, because he said that he wanted a really great script to bring him out of retirement. And to say that Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was the brilliant script that got Jim Carrey out of retirement is a little bit silly to say on paper, but when you actually watch this movie, yeah, I think it's completely true, because those first two films, as fun as they are visually, and the cast and the performances within them have been really great, I just don't think that the scripts for those two movies, with all these subplots and all the, shenanigans that happen that is not as interesting as everything else inside of those films, was the weakest part of those movies. And so now you have a film where they need to earn the right to have Jim Carrey inside of this movie. They need to write a script that will get him out of retirement. And yeah, if they didn't didn't have a good enough script and Jim Carrey didn't want to return for this film, it would be weird to see a different actor play this character, to see Dr. Robotnik not play a role inside this film, and to see that kind of role and to see that arc not to, come to a conclusion inside of this epic finale for this trilogy, I do think would have been a massive missed opportunity. And so how do we get him back? Well, we give him a dual role so he has more to play with in the playground of a comedy that he has with this character. But you also give a very satisfying epic conclusion to this character with a tragic self-sacrifice at the end of this movie, because yes, both Robotniks do die at the end of this film. You have, the grandfather Robotnik reveal that his little evil machine is going to actually destroy the Earth and not just be used to take over the world. He just wants to blow everything up because of the death of his granddaughter, and how Gunn had a role inside of that, even though he was the one who kind of pulled everybody out to run away out of this facility, and that kind of led to, his granddaughter dying and all this stuff that happened with his past. He is just very much jaded with that, which is also the motivation for Shadow's character. He was a friend for this, daughter of Robotnik's essentially, and they had a great bond with each other, and once, she did die, he felt like humanity had no role for him, so he also wanted to join Robotnik in taking everybody out because he had no more light left in him. And so in this epic conclusion where you have Sonic fighting against Shadow in this really great moment, you also have both Robotniks fighting against each other in a very silly and goofy action sequence where they're both, one of them is like a scorpion, the other one is a praying mantis, and it's a very, very silly fight. And you can tell that Jim Carrey's having a blast doing this, but once he does defeat his grandfather and he's killed in a very funny sound effect with like a little bug zapper type of joke inside of this movie, I really loved all that. But this machine is unstoppable. You can't just blow this thing up. You can't just turn off the laser. To see Robotnik go down with this machine and have it all blow up in this, spectacular explosion that looks like a galaxy visually at the ending of this film was really sad to see. And it is such a good ending for this arc because Robotnik started off as the villain, going after these hedgehogs in these first two movies, and now you get to see him, kind of realize his faults, to see a mirrored version of himself turn evil in a very telenovela way, which I thought was a really funny joke throughout this movie as well. And it was really sad to see him, turn to the good side, to be on Team Sonic for once and to die a hero, and to see Stone's reaction to all of that, I think was incredibly tragic and really, really well done, and almost brought a tear to my eye inside of this film, specifically with Stone's reaction to all of this. And again, I'm really shocked that I'm saying this about a Sonic movie, but yeah, it really had an emotional impact that was completely just surprising to me. And this really is a movie that has one of those third acts that just gets more exciting as the movie goes on, because obviously you have the entire ship rising up to the sky and have the world-ending stakes of this movie that is much greater than those past two films, but then you also have this dynamic between Sonic and his friends that I also thought was really great, because at one point inside of this, entire break-in sequence at the gun facility, and you have Tom disguise himself as the commander at one point, and Shadow shows up and he has this past with this commander, and he blames this commander for the death of the girl that he had this dynamic with back in the past, and he decides to punch this character. And I was really willing at this point to think that, yeah, I think they might actually kill off the character of Tom inside of this moment, because they set up the stakes really well at the very beginning of the movie, the death of the commander, and now we have this incredibly hard punch that Shadow's giving to this regular guy, and it was a gut punch to you as an audience, and the stakes got so incredibly high. And the character of Sonic, to see his arc of going very vengeful at this point like Shadow has inside of the past, and see those arcs kind of mirror each other at this point, and him going against the word of Knuckles and Tails at one point to go ahead and get the emerald to go against Shadow, and there's a great fight with both of them, and hopped up on the emerald to be the gold versions of themselves, to have this very epic fight on the moon. The last time I saw an epic fight with two characters that were clones of each other on the moon was in Superman and Lois, and I think both versions of those fights were incredibly epic and very much the height and the biggest epic moment that you can get with both of those characters inside of their respective shows and movies. It was just incredible to see. I think the only moment inside of this film that I genuinely did not like was probably the moments where you have Sonic going against Knuckles and Tails, and it's getting very intense, and the conversation between them is really heightening up. And I thought at one point that maybe Sonic is actually going to go against his friends and actually try to fight them in order to get the emerald out of the knowledge of Knuckles, which I think would have added so many dramatic stakes to this movie. And it kind of just cut away from that argument because they're kind of screaming at each other, and it cuts away to Wade, and Wade has the emerald and he's playing hockey with it, which, yeah, sure, it's a funny joke. Wade getting a cameo in this movie, it's great to see him inside of this movie. It's great that they still gave him a role here, but I really wish that it had more of an impact with Sonic actually betraying his friends and it feeling very dark for this kids movie, because I think it was almost there. It was just an inch away from getting to a very serious and dark point to where Sonic would actually fight his own friends in order to exact his revenge against Shadow, and it didn't happen, or at least it kind of happened, but I don't think they had the guts to actually make this character make a decision that was that dark to actually, punch his friends or to actually fight his friends. And I kind of wish it, just went that extra step to give that film even more stakes, because it just kind of cut away and he just found the emerald and it didn't seem like some climactic moment. It just seemed like they cut away from the climax of that argument, which was a little bit of a bummer. But either way, I do think that everything else inside of this movie, with Sonic's arc and the way he mirrored Shadow and the way that he realized that revenge was not the way to go, and the fact that he got Shadow to believe in the same thing, to want to team up with Shadow to stop this laser from going off, and to see all the arcs kind of come together in this epic finale where you have Sonic and Shadow reconcile their differences, and you have Robotnik go against his grandfather and to actually save the world for once and give a self-sacrifice for himself in this movie. I think that everything when it comes to the finale of this movie, and also seeing that Tom did survive that punch from earlier on in the film, they really let you linger on that potential death of a very beloved character inside this film. I do think that the finale, the third act of this movie, was so good. And so yeah, I thought this was a truly epic conclusion to the Sonic the Hedgehog trilogy that's completely took me by surprise. I really did love everything about this film, and let's just get a little bit into the post-credit scenes, because again, I don't play the Sonic games all too much, so I don't really know the references here in the credit scenes all too much, but we get a reveal with, Metal Sonic, surrounding Sonic inside of this post-credit scene, and you get to see Amy Rose as a character that is introduced at the end of this, because all the Sonic movies end with the post-credit scene that is introducing a new character from the Sonic lore into the movieverse. I really like that. I don't really know these characters all too well, but if Metal Sonic is the villain, which I hear he is a very imposing threat to Sonic inside of the video games, and to have Amy Rose be a very beloved character from the video games also make an appearance here is really cool for fans. And then there's the second post-credit scene, which, at first I thought maybe it was revealing that possibly that Dr. Robotnik somehow survived the explosion, but no, it was more so that, Shadow survived the explosion at the end of the film, so that is what the second post-credit scene is. You get to see his shoes walk up and him pick up a ring, and so it's a little reveal that he's still going to be around, and I'm very curious to see what they would do for a potential Sonic the Hedgehog 4, because the thing that brought me to these movies was Jim Carrey. I do think that he was by far the highlight of this movie for me, and yeah, I do enjoy the characters of Team Sonic, but I am so incredibly connected to Jim Carrey as an actor. He's the reason why I watch these movies, that I don't know if a Sonic the Hedgehog movie can work without his presence there. And I'm very curious to see how they'll be able to pull it off with the creative team, because I do think that he is the part of these movies that add the most humor to it. He adds the most heart in this movie to it, and he adds so much. He just elevates these movies higher than I think they would be at face value, and I don't know if a Sonic the Hedgehog 4 can live up to the heights of this movie because of the lack of Jim Carrey inside the future. And yeah, I do want Jim Carrey to enjoy his retirement. I do want him to go off and be happy and do whatever he wants to do inside of his life, because he's deserved that at this point. He's given us so many great movies, but at the same time, if he could just keep on showing up in these Sonic movies, or just keep on being in movies in general, I'd be very happy as a Jim Carrey fan. But I'm very curious to see what they do, how they fill out the supporting cast without these characters, and see if Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails, and Shadow can kind of, I guess, hold up their own movie without the presence of an actor like Jim Carrey. But those are just going to be my thoughts on Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Again, a very glowing review for me. I think that this is genuinely the perfect version of a Sonic movie. I don't know how they can top this in the future, and it's one of my favorites of the year, very surprisingly. Again, as somebody who wasn't crazy about those first two Sonic movies, I'm shocked to say that I think this is a near perfect Sonic movie. So those are my thoughts on Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more reviews just like this one. I am also doing weekly reviews for Skeleton Crew, so if you haven't joined the bandwagon to be a fan of Skeleton Crew and to kind of, love Star Wars once again, which I think this show is somehow bringing different sides of the Star Wars fandom together for once, which I think is a very hard thing to do, and I think this show is actually accomplishing that for once. I would highly recommend checking out that series and my reviews of those, along with my video for Kraven the Hunter last week and my upcoming video for, I think I'm going to review The Brutalist later on in the week, which again is very different from Sonic 3, but The Brutalist is something playing in LA, and it's in limited release, and I can go check that out later tonight. And I'm also going to be talking about Nosferatu next week over Christmas, so definitely stay tuned on the channel to see more reviews just like this one. Like I said, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe if you did enjoy, and I hope to see you all in my next one.